All right, looking forward to continuing our discussion. A huge thank you to those of you who are joining us here in person, and of course, welcome to those of you who are also joining us online. I'm really pleased to be joined by three wonderful guests today for what I think is going to be a very meaty discussion on the state of the transatlantic relationship. I think there are very few regions that have been as impacted by the current administration as has Europe. And so we have no shortage of things to talk about today. By way of quick introduction, I am joined first right here on my left by the Right Honorable Lord Peter Mendelsohn, who has been the UK ambassador to the United States since 2025. We're also joined by Jovita Neliupshina, who's been ambassador of the European Union to the United States since January 2024. And finally, on the end, Sergej Bogdan-Klisch, who has been head of mission at the Embassy of the Republic of Poland to the United States since November 2024. And so we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to just jump right in. And Ambassador Mendelsohn, I think I'll start with you, and I want to start with Ukraine. Obviously, over the weekend, we had some really spectacular news about the extraordinary attack that Ukraine conducted against Russia's Air Force, strikes that went deep into Russian territory. But we also had significant attacks in recent weeks, Russia increasingly stepping up its attacks on Ukrainian cities over the weekend. A particular attack included more than 500 drones targeting Ukrainian cities. And so while the conflict escalates on the ground, we also had negotiations going on in Istanbul, and as expected, produced some meager results. The concern now is that President Trump will grow frustrated with this process and potentially walk away. And so my question for you is what role you see Europe playing in getting Ukraine and Russia together for peace talks, especially if the United States walks away. And can these efforts by Europe be successful without the clout and the influence and the prodding of the United States?
Well, you're very right about the meager results from Istanbul, and the reason why the results were meager is because President Putin at this time is not interested in a ceasefire. Ceasefire was offered by the Ukrainians, by President Zelensky 2 months ago. A very serious and a very sincere commitment by Zelensky. No doubt at all about that. Zelensky wants the talks and the peace process that President Trump has engineered to be a success. He wants to be at the table. He wants to make sure that Ukraine does nothing that undermines or detracts from President Trump's efforts to bring about a just and peaceful settlement of this war, of this invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And so what do we do in these circumstances when Putin is not interested? Mm-hmm. And I think we have to do two things. We have to ratchet up the pressure on Putin in order to degrade the Russian war machine. And secondly, we have to step up our supply to the Ukrainians of everything they need in order to alter the balance of power on the battlefield. And that's what we in Europe are doing. Mm-hmm. United Kingdom, along with our partners in the European Union, are absolutely determined to stick with Ukraine, to stick with them throughout, to stick with them through whatever negotiations take place, and then stick with them with whatever reassurance and safety we can offer them so as to prevent a further future attack by Russia. But in the meantime, we've got to get more pressure on Russia in order to alter how Putin is viewing this. And I think that at the weekend, what we saw was evidence, testimony, not just of the extraordinary courage and stamina of the Ukrainians, but their inventiveness, their agility. Do not underestimate what the Ukrainians have when it comes to engineering what they need to inflict real damage on the Russian war machine, and we will continue to support it in any and every way we can.
Let me press you on one bit, though. So should President Trump remove himself from the peace process, and of course we don't know exactly what walking away looks like, but how confident are you that the UK, France, and the rest of Europe would be able to fill the gaps that the United States could leave and continue to drive this process towards a more just and durable end?
Completely confident that we in Europe will do everything we possibly can to maintain our support for the Ukrainian fight. Their freedom, their sovereignty, their democracy is at stake, but let's be absolutely frank about this too. We are now seeing a growing Russian threat on our doorstep or in our backyard, depending on where you are. And this has been a massive wake-up call, which is reflected, for example, in the Strategic Defence Review that my own government published at the beginning of this week. New threats require new war readiness and new methods of war and new technology to be deployed in the context of what is a higher threat and new hybrid forms of conducting battles. That's what we have seen and learned from Russia's invasion, and we've got to step up and make sure that we're prepared to take on any such threat in the future.
Mr. Klich, let me come to you, because there's not only the concern that the United States could do less for Ukraine, but the signal that this administration has given is that the United States would like to do less in Europe. And you kind of look at developments since the beginning of the administration, starting with Secretary of Defense Hegseth's trip to Europe, where he delivered a very clear message that Europe would not be America's priority. There's been Washington Post reporting about the interim national defense strategy, which seems to suggest that the United States would continue to view China as the pacing threat, and in order to fund that military buildup would be willing to take risks in other theaters, including Europe. And so I ask, from a Polish perspective, what has been your reaction to the message from the United States? And again, as in the case of Ukraine, how confident are you that Europe will be able to take on greater responsibility, and critically, in the amount of time that is necessary to address the growing threat that Ambassador Mendelsohn has talked about?
There are various messages coming from different corners of the political elite here in Washington, D.C. We are after several consultations with the current administration, and frankly speaking, we enjoy the results of those consultations, because both from the State Department and from the Department of Defense, when I say we, I mean the Polish diplomacy. We receive the same message, that the presence of the United States military might in Europe will be maintained. That's important, not only for deterrence of the eastern flank, it is important for Europe as a whole. And let me remind you about the famous wording from the beginning of NATO, saying let's keep Americans in, Russians out. I would add, and European Union, and make European Union stronger. So this message from the administration is satisfying for us. We are carefully looking at the results of ongoing process of defense posture review here in the United States, and the beginning of the process of budgetary attempts for the next round, for the next annual budget. So those two factors will determine, the final posture of military units in Europe, hoping that at least, once again, at least in Central Europe, the American troops will be maintained. As you know, in my country, in Poland, we enjoy a huge deployment of American troops, and we hope that it will be maintained as well, because 10,000 troops, it is an important factor for reassurance, you know, of the part of the eastern flank, and because we are trying to coordinate our approaches with other countries from Europe, it is also a good message for Europe as a whole.
Yeah, great transition to you, Ambassador Niliapshina. The EU has clearly stepped up in a very major way to try and catalyze these changes in the defense industrial base and deterrence that will be required. You've got, for example, the new European Defense Industrial Strategy, which outlines the strategy for defense industrial policy looking out to 2035. You've got the new EU Readiness 2030 plan, or what was formerly, I guess, called Rearm Europe, which is mobilizing up to 800 billion euros for this purpose. And so I'd love to hear from you, if you could talk to us a little bit about how the EU sees its role now in the defense domain. And I would love if you could comment specifically on how the EU is working to offset some of the historical headwinds to the EU acting as a security actor. You know, things like a fragmented defense industrial base, sometimes at times lack of political will to follow through on commitments. The EU is stepping in and trying to ease some of these challenges, but it would be great to hear from you what the new view, the attitude, and the motivation is to again, make these investments on a time frame that is relevant to deterring the Russia challenge.
Well, thank you for the question, and yes, I can agree that you have to keep Russians out, Americans in, and European Union up.
Yeah,
I think that's probably one of the aims of all the documents you mentioned. But in the field of defense and security, actually, European Union goes through an extraordinary transformation. Because their idea when the EU was created was to have a peace project, and we thought that peace actually can happen through working together, trading together, producing different industrial goods together, and of course during the different crises European Union evolved, and what we are seeing right now is yet again a new leap forward, and this time is in defense and security. If you ask me, I would say it's long overdue. We probably have already started back in 2014 after Crimea, where all the bells were tolling at that moment. But it took a bit longer strategic thinking to step up. And I think that what changed, first of all, is the really realization that it's not that only we have the Russia's aggression in Ukraine and a full-fledged continental war, but as well how much of the investment it needs to support Ukraine and to win the war, because Ukraine is actually not really fighting only for their territorial integrity and for freedom, but they are fighting for our values in general. So that's why we actually really keep the support. And when you look at the documents, actually documents as well contain part of the Ukraine, how we developing our and boosting our defense industry, we can actually continue to support Ukraine. So first of all, is of course everything is about money and resources.
Right.
We have to have resources. So 850 billion for upcoming less than five years. Part of that money, 600 billion and around, is the national money, which countries can mobilize due to the flexing our financial rules, because we have a very strict rules since the previous financial crisis that you cannot go over the 3% of budget deficit and 60% of national sovereign debt. So we have to to make sure that we have enough financial space for that. And it was just announced by the European Commission today that actually 16 member states asked to apply those rules. And then we had, for the first time, we're actually mobilizing 150 billion euros from the financial markets as the EU. So the European Union, as the institution, actually will invest money for defense capabilities, which is mostly targeting joint procurement. So the member states would work together in order to build up the capabilities in the fields like air defense, cyber, and any other where they see necessary. And another is actually investments in the defense innovation, because what we see in Ukraine actually is that a lot of the technological development is happening on the spot. And we have actually, this is the most advanced army in the world, we have to see, and the one which is trained and well equipped. So we actually have to learn quite a lot. And of course, opening our financial institutions and mobilizing private sector to invest, to help us to invest in those needs. I think that's the resources. Once you have the resources, you have to move smoothly. Hopefully, we will finalize our decision making by end of June. And last but not least, it's always the need of political will.
Right.
And I think that political will is there to move forward. And I think that after the certain break, we already had a meeting between EU and NATO. Mm-hmm. Whatever EU is doing, it's not doing for the sake of EU. It's doing to contribute actually for the security of the continent, and the NATO standards, the needs of the capabilities which are identified should be taken into account, because they're the heart and the core of the security of the continents. The heart and the core of the deterrence is actually NATO. So we are trying to contribute with building an industrial base in Europe.
Wonderful. And so speaking of changes in political will, Ambassador Mendelsohn, your country has just put out its strategic defense review. The UK Prime Minister announced that the UK has to become, quote unquote, battle ready, and that every citizen has to play a role in the defense of the country. All sorts of things, I think, that Ambassador Nelyupshina just mentioned about innovation and the need to learn from what's happening in Ukraine. Give us, I think, the bumper sticker, or kind of the Cliff Notes version of the Strategic Defense Review. What does our audience need to know and understand about where the UK is headed? And talk to us a little bit also about what is driving this. Clearly there's threats from mainly Russia, but also China. But how much of this review was driven by a sense that the US also may no longer be a reliable security partner? To what extent did that factor in, if at all?
The fact is that for all of us in Europe, including the United Kingdom, we have for far too long been far too much the passive recipients of America's security guarantee. And we're very grateful for it. But it's encouraged a complacency which has become an enemy of our own security. Okay? Now, we've therefore got to make sure that as a result of all our defense reviews in the United Kingdom and across the member states of the European Union, we realize that whilst we've enjoyed spending a very healthy peace dividend for the last 20 plus years, during that period there have been mounting unpaid bills for our own defense. And that is what is significant about this turning around now. It's what the ambassador was saying. I think it was Bogdan who first used this. What was it? Americans in, Russians out.
EU up.
Yeah. Well, let me remind you that the original was Americans in, Russians out, and Germans down. And
That's
it
why
is,
I replaced, you know, the
and-
third part
and then I-
with
well-
making
With the
European Union stronger.
yeah, but here's the point. Here's the point. Look at what's happened in Germany. Look at what Chancellor Merz fought and won his election on. Look at the announcement that's come since about the German debt break. I mean, look at the commitment that is now becoming a reality about German defense spending. This is transformative. And we welcome it strongly, very strongly. So of course we want, you know, the EU up. But the EU won't be up unless Germany's right up there in the top tier as well. And that is what is so important about the change that has come about in the last year or so. And I think you'll see when Chancellor Merz comes here on Thursday to see the President, you'll see a very different message being delivered, a very different tenor, and a very different sort of engagement and commitment by Germany. And it's really very important. Now, of course, we need higher spending. Okay, we all know that. We also need realistic timelines, but we also need genuine 21st century capabilities. And we know that a lot more is going to become uncrewed and unmanned, more autonomous. It's going to be driven by AI in spectacular ways. I've just been at an exhibition at the conference center here in DC about AI and its potential. And in the area of defense and becoming battle ready, you know, we're talking about information that's transformed, intelligence transformed, targeting transformed, anticipation of what our adversaries are going to do transformed. Now, when I say genuine capabilities, and when my Prime Minister talks about being battle ready, he means drawing on and utilizing the whole spectrum of capabilities. And those capabilities, as I say, are being transformed by a magic key, and that magic key is called AI. Now, Secretary Rubio has described what we need to do on defense, and in completely reviving the Atlantic Alliance as requiring a decade of effort on all our parts. And it is a decade. I mean, yes, we can talk about a deadline here or a target date there or whatever, and no doubt all this will be discussed and come out in the wash at the Hague summit, the NATO summit in The Hague. As you know, my government's already announced an increase in defense spending over the next 2 years. As you know, they've also set greater ambitions, both for the next 3 to 5 years, but also over the next decade. And we've all got to do this. And we've got to do it partly, as I said, because we've done too little over the last 20 years, but because we also have to realize that the United States is adjusting its own regional priorities. Doesn't mean to say the United States is quitting the Euro-Atlantic area. It doesn't mean to say that the United States is sort of pulling the rug from underneath NATO. I don't see any evidence of that at all. But I do see a recognition by the administration of China's enlarging military capability, the dramatic expansion of its forces and capabilities, and you just can't ignore that. And so the United States has got to identify how and in what ways and with whom it needs to become more battle ready in the Indo-Pacific in order to provide that tough, strong deterrent that we need to offer to China as it expands its own military capacity. And we in Britain, we have global interests. Obviously, our primary focus is on Europe and the Euro-Atlantic area. And of course, we're NATO first as a country, but we're not NATO only. We have global interests, and we see how China, for example, not just poses a rising threat in its own vicinity, in its own region, but in the support, for example, that it's given to Russia. Russia, I think, would found it very difficult to sustain this war machine without its economy being sustained by China in a whole variety of different ways. So we've got to be alert to different sorts of threat. That's why we're not ignoring the Indo-Pacific, and it's why we're very strong members of AUKUS with the United States and Australia, a very valuable 21st century alliance in my view. So we've got to strike the right balance and priorities. Of course, we do that, others in Europe do it, the United States do it, but we do it together. We do it through cooperation, collaboration, through discussion, by making sure that the safety that we've given ourselves to date is secured in the future by our own collaboration as the closest allies amongst any nations in the world. And that's what we're going to continue doing.
Ambassador Niliapshina, let me come to you. I mean, it is a pivotal moment, and as the United States is prioritizing China in the Indo-Pacific, Washington is asking Europe to step up and do more. There is a burden shifting that is taking place. But at the same time that the United States, for example, is levying tariffs on Europe, making it more difficult for them to stimulate economic growth that is necessary to fuel the spending that is required. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as both the opportunities and the risks in this moment for Europe?
Well, first of all, we are the largest trading partners with the U.S. In 2023, it was 1.7 trillion. Last year, it was probably 1.9. Statistics still coming. So over the last 3 years, the increase in trade is 30%. The EU and U.S. trade actually is 35% of the global trade. The EU constitutes of 65% of their foreign direct investment in this country. 16 million jobs is because the trade and investments of Europe. So it's a massive. There is no sector where EU and US is not cooperating, and including, of course, defense. And just 35% of what you export to foreign countries goes actually to the EU. And if you take EU members who are as well the members of NATO alliance, 65% what they spend on defense, they spend in US. So we are the major partner here, and this actually makes our relations very much intertwined. The supply chains are very much intertwined, and it does not really go one direction that we are just buying. We are actually producing quite a lot and exporting different components for different machines. And my favorite example usually is that's good to have tanks, but the cannon on the tank is European. The same as goes for other like factories. If you have a robot in the factory, it's a 95.5% is a European robot in that factory. So it's really we are integrated in there, and I think that actually opens a lot of opportunities. That's why actually our main offer for the United States is actually go 0 to 0 for on the industrial goods. For tariffs, that then will actually make easier for defense capabilities to be developed. So this is, maybe the trade part. If we think about, developing our own capabilities, we're speaking about NATO standards and the gaps or the capabilities NATO identify we have to develop. This is where we can actually contribute with our extra financial resources, and on top of that, I think that none of the security, when we speak about security, is much broader. You know, we can bring in the new technologies, as Ambassador Mendelsohn mentioned, but as well, it's a really hardcore security, which our defense and military had to have, and which is developed by NATO. There is another part of the security which is more resilience. And you know, this is where actually the European Union can come in, be it, you know, protecting and working on how to protect a critical infrastructure, cyber security, human security or societal security, if you wish, energy security. So what's not? There is a huge, you know, opportunities. And if you think actually what happened, like for example, with the military mobility. The NATO forces have to move, and they have to be as flexible as possible, you know, due to having in mind the increased threats in Europe. Military mobility is financed by the EU, and it's based on the NATO standards, because you know you cannot build a railroad which would not contribute that. So I think that working together and bringing those two organizations towards the common interest here to increase the security, to tackle the threats, to contribute to deterrence. This is the key, and where we seeing our role. And you know, interestingly enough, EU is always at the table at NATO.
Yep. Yeah, that's really wonderful. And so, Mr. Kleek, just to pull this thread of opportunity a little bit more, looking forward to what the future transatlantic relationship looks like. I think we all agree there's no going back to the way that we did business or had relations with Russia. That's a thing of the past. But I think one might also make the case that there's probably no going back to exactly the way that the US and the US relationship was with Europe. The transatlantic relationship, I think, will also look different for many of the reasons that Ambassador Mendelsohn and Ambassador Nelyapshina have outlined. And so we're all in this moment where, you know, we recognize that the alliance needs a rethink. And so I know it's still very early days, and we're all, you know, in think tanks, this is what we're thinking about, like how do we move forward? But would love to hear your thoughts on how do you think the transatlantic relationship will have to change looking forward?
Let's not forget that we are approaching the next NATO summit in The Hague. And this meeting in June this year will determine the next phase of development of the alliance. But let's not forget also that we are after at least two crucial summits after the beginning of the Russian war against Ukraine. I mean Madrid and Vilnius summit. And let's remember that during this first one, the new strategic concept was adopted. And in this strategic concept, by the way, devoted mainly to the Russian threat, Russia was described as the significant and direct threat for every member state of the alliance. There is a rule within the alliance that the strategic concept is not changed more often than every 10 years. So it is the document that obliges us, you know, to do as much as possible to deter this strategic threat. That's my first remark. Secondly, there are some important issues beyond this crucial issue discussed for years, not only for months. I mean burden sharing. Of course, majority of member states of the alliance is in favor of supporting bigger contribution from European member states of NATO. Without doubts, it happens and it will happen in the future. But we are also beginning the discussion about, first of all, relevance of regional operational plans, absolutely crucial for reinforcement of the attacked countries, not only for Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Romania, Finland, but also other countries of the eastern flank. So we have to be absolutely convinced that those operational plans are implemented. It is one of the crucial topics during the next summit. Secondly, we are discussing the practical content of the new concept adopted before of deterrence by denial. Deterrence by denial is not only a concept, it has to be implemented as well. And it will be another crucial discussion during the Hague Summit. Finally, we are talking about the new model of rapid reaction force of the alliance. Let's remember that the decision during both Madrid and Vilnius summits to increase the number of soldiers in those and number of units in those rapid reaction force of the alliance was critical, very brave. They were upgraded from the level of 40,000 to around 300,000 of soldiers. So this decision has to be implemented as well. I want to, making such a landscape of necessary decisions of the next Hague Summit, I want to stress that NATO has to be effective. Not only politically united, but military effective. And it is one of the main challenges that we are facing right now.
We only have a couple of minutes left, so maybe we can do one rapid fire. And I was really determined to end this on a positive note, although this discussion was quite positive, finding the opportunities in the current spate of challenges. But if you could each think about what is one factor that gives you optimism about the future of the transatlantic relationship, that we will be able to navigate current challenges, evolve the relationship into something stronger, perhaps even more effective and just as durable as we've had over the last 70 or so years? What gives you optimism that we will chart these waters?
Well, perversely, I'm more optimistic because I think that President Trump has done us a favor in Europe. I mean, most people will think, oh my God, you know. I don't. I think he's done us a favor. I think he's saying, look, you've got to get real in a whole number of different ways, in different areas, compartments and timelines and spending. And what we've got to get real about is essentially three pillars that are going to support the Atlantic Alliance in this century. One is the military. I mean, the level of spend, obviously, the cohesion amongst us and between us and our rate of innovation. Second pillar is economic. Weight, competitiveness. We cannot support our ambitions in the defense and security sphere without shaping up economically in all our economies. We've just got to be all together. Higher levels of investment, more competitiveness, upgrading of our skills. If you take, for example, nuclear submarine production, very, very important for the United States, very important too for Australia and for Britain. It's one of the main problems. Skills, finding the people who will actually be able to devote and work for and plug into the expanding production capacity that we need in all our countries. And the third pillar is technology. Technology, where we have a great advantage, but we will sustain that advantage, that technological advantage over our adversaries, the more that we as allies collaborate and work together in technological innovation. We've got to back more scientific enterprise in all our nations. I'm very, very keen indeed between my own country and the United States to create a greater technology partnership in different sectors. We're obviously anchored in defense, the industrial base and national security. I mean, there are no two countries in the world, who are more tethered and act more in harmony and in mutual support between us in the national security and defense areas than Britain and the United States, obviously. But, it goes for everyone. And we will keep ahead of our adversaries the more we are collaborating together, not subtracting, not undermining, not throwing barriers in the way of what we're doing. We've got to work together as allies, and that's really the lesson of the last post-war period. We've come so far and achieved so much and secured our safety so dramatically by working together as allies, and that's exactly what we've got to do during the course of this century too.
So a wake-up call to reinvigorate alliances. What gives you optimism?
Well, I would say actually President Trump was right about two things. First, of course, that we have to invest in defense more, which Ambassador Mendelsohn so eloquently put, because the thing is that you cannot sleep over. Right. You cannot outweigh, and the peace in Ukraine actually is peace for Europe. So this is one thing, and here we are actually. Already the defense spending is increased by more than 30%, and I think that the more to come. The other part is actually over-dependence on energy. And I think that the lessons we learned in the beginning of Russia's war in Ukraine is actually very obvious. And we actually moved and made a huge turnaround from this dependence to really doing a strategic choice and buying especially American LNG and the Norwegian LNG, choosing to buy it from the NATO allies who are the more trusted. And a couple of weeks ago we announced actually that we are zeroing it the Russian energy in less than 2 years, and I think that's a huge transformation. And it's not only because Americans told us to do so. I think that it's a strategic choice.
Yep. And final word is yours.
Very briefly, 3 or 4 factors. The first one it is that Ukraine still fights and fights successfully. It means that it's ready, that it's able to protect this part of its territory that was able to protect 3 years ago. That's first. Moreover, it is ready also it is able also to launch long-range operations targeting strategic airfields of the Russian Federation. Congratulations. Congratulations. Secondly, that we were able to maintain, the unity of the alliance, and I hope that it will be maintained also after the Hague summit. Thirdly, that the European Union survived a kind of Copernican revolution. When I say Copernican revolution, it means that when for years it was perceived as an institution able only to write new strategies, new action plans, etc., etc. So after the beginning of the second invasion of Russia against Ukraine, it was able to be engaged practically in a practical, huge support for fighting neighbor. And it continues to do so. 3 elements.
Wonderful. So I'm so glad we ended on a positive note. Please join me in thanking our ambassadors here. And a quick note, we're going to take a short break for lunch, but join us again at 12:45 as we get started for the afternoon sessions. But please, let's thank our ambassadors.
Thank you very much.
I went over, I'm sorry.